The rain hammered against my windshield like a barrage of bullets, each fat drop exploding into blurry starbursts that warped the Manhattan streets into an abstract painting of pure desperation. My hands, cold and slick with anxiety, trembled on the steering wheel of my ancient Honda Civic. For the 100th time in barely 10 minutes, I flicked my gaze to the rearview mirror. Derek's silver BMW was still there, a relentless phantom weaving through the congested traffic, its headlights piercing the storm like the predatory eyes of a hunter. I was only 23 years old, yet I was running for my life from the man I'd once foolishly believed I loved. Come on, I whispered to my sputtering car, pressing harder on the accelerator as another red light loomed ahead. The engine wheezed in protest, a familiar, weary sound I'd grown accustomed to over the past year. Every penny had been scraped together for my physical therapy certification, earned through grueling double shifts at the rehabilitation clinic. My entire existence had been a fragile construct, held together by sheer hope and relentless determination, until Derek Morrison decided I belonged to him. The light flickered green, and I floored it, my tires slipping momentarily on the slick asphalt before gripping. In a terrifying echo, Derek's car surged forward too, instantly closing the precarious gap between us. Through his rain-streaked windshield, I could make out his silhouette, a phone pressed to his ear, undoubtedly calling his cronies to corner me somewhere inescapable. My ribs still ached from his last conversation just 3 days ago, when I'd tried to break things off for good. He'd grabbed me with bruising force, his fingers digging into my arms as he'd screamed about how nobody ever left Derek Morrison, how I was his property, and how he'd make sure I understood that, one way or another. I'd been hiding at my friend Sarah's apartment ever since. But somehow, he'd found me tonight, following me as I attempted to drive home, stalking me through the rain-soaked streets as if I were nothing more than helpless prey, and he, something ravenous and vicious. The speedometer needle crept toward 45 miles per hour as I navigated the narrow canyons of the financial district, where towering glass monuments to capitalism loomed on either side like glittering, sterile tombstones. At this late hour, most of the buildings were dark, save for scattered windows where someone toiled late or security guards made their solitary rounds. Derek's BMW gained another car length. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat, and without even glancing, I knew it was him. He'd been relentlessly calling and texting for the past 20 minutes, each message more chillingly threatening than the last. The most recent one, glimpsed briefly at a red light, had been terrifying in its simplicity. "You can't run forever, Elena." But I could try. I yanked the steering wheel sharply left onto Madison Avenue, my tires screaming in protest as I took the turn far too fast. The Civic fishtailed precariously for a heart-stopping second before finally regaining traction. Behind me, Derek's engine roared, a guttural sound as he followed suit. The rain continued to pummel my car with increasing intensity, transforming the world outside into a watercolor nightmare where everything bled together in a blurred wash of gray and fear. That's when I spotted the intersection ahead, where Madison crossed with East 47th Street. The traffic light was cycling through its colors, and I estimated I had maybe 30 seconds before it turned red again. If I could somehow make it through and Derek got caught behind the light, perhaps, just perhaps, I could lose him in the labyrinthine side streets beyond. I pressed the accelerator to the floor. The Honda's engine protested with a sound like a dying animal, but the speedometer needle, stubbornly, mercifully, crept toward 50 miles per hour. The intersection grew larger in my windshield, and I could see the cross-traffic beginning to slow as their light shifted to yellow. Almost there. That's when I noticed the black SUV. It was stopped at the cross street, patiently waiting for the light to change. A massive Escalade, gleaming even through the downpour, looking like it belonged to someone of immense importance, someone who could afford a vehicle that cost more than I'd earn in 2 full years. Even in the rain and encroaching darkness, I could tell it was immaculate, its tinted windows so dark they reflected the streetlights like black, impenetrable mirrors. The traffic light directly ahead of me flickered from yellow to red. I should have stopped. Any rational person would have stopped, but Derek's headlights were pressing right behind me, and rationality had abandoned me the moment I'd realized he was following me home. I had mere seconds to decide: stop and face whatever horrifying fate Derek had planned, or run the red light and pray the cross-traffic would grant me enough of a head start to vanish. I chose to run. My Civic shot through the intersection just as the cross-traffic light turned green. I caught a fleeting glimpse of the Escalade beginning to move, its driver likely assuming the intersection was clear. Time slowed to thick, viscous seconds. I saw my car's desperate trajectory intersect directly with the massive SUV's path. I saw my speedometer hovering stubbornly near 50 miles per hour. I saw the exact, horrifying moment when my ancient Honda Civic collided with what had to be the most expensive vehicle I had ever been within 100 feet of. The impact slammed me forward against my seatbelt, my airbag exploding in my face with a choking, chemical smell and the brutal force of a punch. The world instantly devolved into a deafening symphony of crushing metal, shattering glass, and the screaming protest of two engines that had suddenly, violently, stopped doing what engines were supposed to do. Then, an unnerving silence, broken only by the steady, persistent patter of rain on twisted metal and the chilling hiss of escaping steam. I sat stunned for a moment, tasting blood from where I'd bitten my tongue, my ears ringing violently from the force of the crash. My car had come to a rest at a grotesque angle, blocking most of the intersection, its front end crumpled irrevocably against the rear quarter panel of the sleek Escalade. "Oh God," I whispered, the crushing reality of what I'd just done washing over me like a wave of ice water. "Oh God. Oh God. Oh God." I'd just rear-ended someone's incredibly expensive SUV while running a red light. Even if I had insurance, which was laughably inadequate, this was going to financially destroy me. And that was assuming the other driver didn't press charges for reckless driving. With hands still shaking uncontrollably, I managed to unbuckle my seatbelt and shove my driver's door open. Rain immediately soaked through my sweater as I stumbled out, needing to assess the damage. My Civic's front end was utterly destroyed, the hood buckled upward, steam rising mournfully from the mangled remains of the radiator. The Escalade, however, had fared remarkably better, boasting only some superficial paint scratches and a dent in its rear panel that, paradoxically, still managed to look expensive. That's when I heard car doors opening. 3 doors, to be precise. Not just the driver's, but passenger doors as well. I looked up through the sheeting rain to see figures emerging from the SUV, and my blood turned to slush in my veins. The first man who stepped out was tall and lean, wearing a dark suit that somehow appeared perfectly pressed despite the relentless downpour. He moved with the fluid, coiled grace of someone accustomed to violence, and even in the dim street lighting, I could clearly discern the telltale bulge of a shoulder holster beneath his jacket. The second man was broader, built like a formidable linebacker, with hands that looked capable of crushing bones and a face that suggested he'd done precisely that on multiple occasions. He positioned himself near the rear of the SUV, his eyes scanning the intersection with professional, almost predatory alertness. But it was the third man who made my breath catch in my throat, a sudden, sharp gasp. He emerged from the driver's side with the unhurried, inherent confidence of someone who owned whatever space he occupied. Tall and powerfully built, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that managed to look perfectly styled even in the deluge. His suit was undeniably expensive, meticulously tailored to showcase broad shoulders and a lean waist, and he wore it with the casual elegance of a man born to wealth and absolute power. But it was his eyes that truly stopped my heart. Dark brown, almost black in the fragmented street lighting, they fixed on me with an unnerving intensity that made every instinct I possessed scream danger. This wasn't just someone wealthy enough to afford a luxury SUV. This was someone accustomed to having problems solved quickly and quietly, by whatever means necessary. He walked toward me with measured, deliberate steps, the rain beating on his suit without seeming to touch him. When he spoke, his voice carried an accent I couldn't quite place, something European, perhaps Italian, and an undeniable authority that made it clear he was accustomed to being obeyed. "You just caused $50,000 in damage to my vehicle," he said, his tone shockingly conversational despite the chaotic circumstances. I swallowed hard, tasting blood and rain. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean, now you owe me your life." The words hit me like another collision, final and absolute. Behind him, his two silent companions had already taken positions that effectively blocked any potential escape routes, though I doubted my legs would have carried me far anyway. That's when Derek's BMW screeched to a halt behind my wrecked Civic. The sleek black SUV that now carried me through the rain-soaked streets of Manhattan felt more like a hearse than a rescue vehicle. I sat rigid in the back seat, hyper-aware of the two silent men flanking me. Their expensive suits and concealed weapons made it abundantly clear this was no charity ride. The man who had stepped out of the Escalade, the one whose penetrating brown eyes still haunted my thoughts, sat directly across from me with the casual, inherent confidence of someone who owned whatever space he occupied. Dante Moretti. That's what the lean man with the shoulder holster, whom he'd called Marco, had addressed him as when they'd efficiently bundled me into this vehicle, moments after Derek's mysterious disappearance into the night. "Just Dante," Marco had said, spoken with the kind of reverence usually reserved for royalty or religious figures. "Where are you taking me?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible over the low hum of the engine and the steady drumming of rain against the bulletproof glass. "Somewhere safe," Dante replied, his accented voice carrying subtle undertones I couldn't quite identify. "Italian, definitely, but refined by years of American education and international business dealings. Your friend Derek won't be bothering you anymore." The way he said it sent a fresh jolt of ice through my veins. Derek's silver BMW had simply vanished from the intersection along with its driver, as if neither had ever existed. When I dared to ask what had happened to him, Dante had merely offered a slow, enigmatic smile, an expression that contained no warmth whatsoever. "What did you do to him?" "I convinced him to pursue other interests," Dante said, adjusting the pristine white cuffs of his shirt. Even after standing in the pouring rain and dealing with a car accident, he looked like he'd just stepped from the pages of a luxury magazine. "Derek Morrison has been operating under the mistaken impression that he could conduct business in my territory without consequences. Tonight provided an excellent opportunity to correct that misunderstanding." I stared at him, trying to process the chillingly casual way he discussed what sounded suspiciously like a direct threat, or worse, a violent execution. "Your territory?" "Manhattan below 59th Street. The docks in Brooklyn. Several establishments in Queens." Dante's dark eyes met mine with unnerving intensity. "You've been living and working in areas under my family's protection for over a year, Elena Harper." My blood turned to slush. He knew my name. My full name. "How do you, 23 years old, graduated from NYU with a degree in physical therapy last spring," he continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Currently working at Riverside Rehabilitation Center on East 34th Street while completing your certification requirements. Lives alone in a studio apartment on 47th Street. Pays rent 3 days late every month, but always pays in full." Each detail hit me like a separate blow, a cruel invasion. "You've been watching me?" "I've been watching Derek Morrison," Dante corrected, pulling out a sleek tablet from a hidden compartment I hadn't noticed. "Derek Morrison, who owes money to people connected to my organization. Derek Morrison, who has been using you as collateral for debts he can't pay." The words didn't make sense at first, bouncing around in my brain like pinballs. Asterisk collateral. 3 weeks ago, Derek borrowed $50,000 from an associate of mine to cover gambling debts he owed to other, less patient creditors. Dante swiped across the tablet screen, revealing what appeared to be complex financial records. When he defaulted on the payment schedule, he offered alternative compensation. "You." I felt like I was falling through space, the world tilting sideways around me. That's impossible. We broke up. I told him I never wanted to see him again. Yes, I'm aware of your attempts to end the relationship. Dante's voice carried a note of something that might have been sympathy, a rare, unsettling sound. Derek had no intention of honoring your wishes. He planned to deliver you to my associate tonight, claiming you had agreed to work off his debt through specialized services. The full, horrifying implications crashed over me like ice water. Derek hadn't been chasing me out of jealousy or possessive anger. He'd been hunting me like cargo, planning to hand me over to criminals who would use me to pay his debts. I had no idea, I whispered, my hand shaking uncontrollably in my lap. I believe you. Dante reached into his jacket and withdrew a thick manila folder filled with documents and photographs. Elena Harper, daughter of Michael and Sarah Harper, both deceased. No siblings, no close family. Worked her way through college while caring for her grandmother until the woman's death 2 years ago. Clean record, no criminal associations, no debts beyond standard student loans. He knew everything about me, more than Derek had ever bothered to learn during our 6-month relationship. The SUV turned onto a tree-lined avenue in what I immediately recognized as Long Island's most exclusive area. Mansion after opulent mansion rolled past the windows, each one representing more wealth than I'd ever see in a lifetime of physical therapy work. Where are we going? I asked again, my voice thin. My home. Dante closed the folder with a decisive snap. Derek Morrison's arrangement with my associate has been terminated. But that leaves us with a problem. What kind of problem? The kind that gets you killed if we handle it incorrectly. The SUV slowed as we approached a set of imposing iron gates, seamlessly integrated into a towering stone wall that seemed to stretch for blocks. Victor Clav doesn't believe in coincidences, Elena. When he discovers that Derek's collateral happened to crash into my vehicle on the same night Derek disappeared, he's going to assume you're working for me. Asterisk Victor Clav. Asterisk the name meant absolutely nothing to me, but Dante pronounced it like a curse word, imbued with venom. Who is Victor Clav? The head of the Russian organization that's been trying to expand into my territory for the past 2 years. The gate swung open silently, revealing a winding driveway that curved gracefully through meticulously manicured gardens toward a mansion that belonged in architectural magazines. He's also the man Derek owed money to before he came to my associate for help. I watched the enormous house grow larger as we approached, my brain struggling desperately to keep up with the intricate layers of criminal politics I'd apparently stumbled into. So Derek owed money to this Clav person, borrowed from your people to pay him back, and was planning to give me to your associate when he couldn't repay that loan? Precisely. Dante seemed faintly pleased that I was following the convoluted logic. Victor Clav is not known for his forgiving nature. When he discovers that Derek has vanished and you've survived, he's going to want answers. And Victor's interrogation methods are considerably less gentle than mine. The SUV came to a stop in front of the mansion's imposing main entrance, where more men in dark suits waited in the rain. Through the downpour, I could clearly discern the outlines of security cameras, motion sensors, and what looked suspiciously like armed guards strategically positioned around the sprawling property. This is kidnapping, I said, though the words sounded hollow even to me, lacking any real conviction. This is protection, Dante replied, his voice carrying absolute, unyielding certainty. You're not safe out there anymore, Elena. Derek made sure of that when he put your name on documents as his collateral. The door beside me opened, revealing the lean man with the shoulder holster. Marco, Dante had called him during the brief, tense conversation they'd had while transferring me from my wrecked Honda to this SUV. Welcome to the Moretti estate, Miss Harper, Marco said, his voice professionally courteous, but carrying an unmistakable undertone that suggested disagreement simply wasn't an option. I looked back at Dante, who was already stepping out of the vehicle with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to having his every need anticipated. How long? That depends on several factors, he replied, straightening his suit jacket with a practiced gesture. How quickly we can locate Derek Morrison's current whereabouts. How much information Victor Clav already has about tonight's events. How effectively we can convince him that you pose no threat to his operations. Dante's smile returned, cold and sharp as winter steel. And if you can't convince him, then we'll have to explore other options. As I followed him up the grand stone steps toward the mansion's entrance, rainwater running in rivulets from my hair and my clothes still damp and clinging from the accident, I caught my reflection in the gleaming glass doors. I looked exactly like what I was, a disheveled, terrified 23-year-old physical therapy student who had stumbled headfirst into something far, far beyond her understanding. But Dante Moretti, pristine and unruffled, looked like he was simply coming home. The foyer that greeted us was larger than my entire studio apartment, boasting polished marble floors that brilliantly reflected the light from a massive crystal chandelier and priceless artwork that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years. Everything within spoke of old money, deeply established power, and the kind of impenetrable security that came from being utterly untouchable. Your rooms are on the 2nd floor, Dante said, handing his damp suit jacket to a woman who seemed to materialize from nowhere to take it. Marco will show you up and explain the house rules. We'll discuss your situation in more detail tomorrow, after you've had time to process tonight's events. House rules? Nothing unreasonable, Marco assured me, gesturing toward a sweeping, ornate staircase. Mostly for your own protection. The grounds are secure, but we ask that guests don't wander unescorted after dark. The staff is discreet and trustworthy, but we prefer that certain topics not be discussed with them. I followed him up the stairs, hyper-aware of how utterly out of place I looked in this palace of shimmering marble and rich mahogany. My sneakers squeaked slightly against the polished steps, and I was certain I was leaving damp footprints on priceless, imported carpets. Miss Harper. Dante's voice, calm and resonant, stopped me at the top of the stairs. I turned to find him looking up at me with those intense brown eyes, his expression unreadable, yet strangely compelling. You're not a prisoner here. You're a guest under my protection. But understand that protection comes with certain obligations. What kind of obligations? Complete honesty about your relationship with Derek Morrison. Full cooperation with our security measures. And absolute discretion about what you see and hear while you're here. His voice carried the undeniable weight of law, as if these weren't mere requests, but unbending commandments. Can I count on your compliance? I thought about Derek's chilling plan to sell me to criminals. About Victor Clav and his reportedly harsh interrogation methods. About the wrecked shell of my Honda Civic sitting in that intersection, along with the shattered remnants of my old life. Yes, I said quietly, the word barely a whisper. You can count on it. Excellent. Dante's smile this time held a surprising trace of genuine warmth, a flicker of humanity in his otherwise impassive demeanor. Welcome to your new life, Elena Harper. 3 days at the Moretti mansion had taught me a profound and unsettling truth: luxury could feel surprisingly like a velvet-lined prison. I woke each morning in a bedroom larger than most people's entire apartments, surrounded by furnishings that rightfully belonged in museums. Meals were served by silent staff who treated me with polite deference, yet never quite met my eyes, their gazes always averted. This is ridiculous, I said to my reflection in the bathroom mirror, which was framed in what appeared to be genuine gold leaf. My wild red hair looked strangely out of place against the backdrop of imported Italian marble and fixtures that probably cost more than my yearly salary. I told myself, I'm not his possession, but every piece of evidence suggested otherwise. Designer clothes had inexplicably appeared in the walk-in closet, all in my exact size, all in styles I would have chosen if I'd had unlimited money. The bathroom was stocked with an array of luxury cosmetics and skincare products from brands I'd only ever seen in glossy magazines. Even my meals were perfectly calibrated to my preferences, as if someone had studied my dietary habits with scientific precision, which, I was beginning to suspect, they absolutely had. A soft knock at my sweet door interrupted my brooding. Marco's voice followed immediately after. "Miss Harper, Mr. Moretti requests your presence in the dining room." I'd quickly learned that requests from Dante Moretti weren't actually requests at all. "I'll be down in a minute," I called back, smoothing the wrinkles from the silk blouse I'd reluctantly chosen from the mysteriously well-stocked closet. Everything fit perfectly, of course. Even the undergarments were my exact size, a level of attention to detail that should have been flattering, but instead felt deeply invasive. The dining room itself could easily have hosted a small wedding, with its sparkling crystal chandelier and a table that stretched for at least 20 feet. Yet, only 2 places were set this morning. At one end, where the morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the meticulously maintained gardens, Dante sat, engrossed in what appeared to be financial reports, his dark hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car had, before I'd so spectacularly destroyed it in the accident that had brought us together. When he finally looked up at my approach, those intense brown eyes assessed me with the same thoroughness he might apply to a high-stakes business acquisition. "Good morning, Elena. I trust you slept well." "As well as anyone can when they're being held against their will," I replied, taking the seat across from him. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I was tired of pretending this arrangement was anything other than what it truly was. "Against your will?" Dante set down his papers with deliberate care, giving me his full, undivided attention. "You're free to leave whenever you choose. The front door isn't locked. You can walk straight into Victor Klov's arms. You've made it very clear that's not actually an option. Victor Klov is the reality of your situation, Elena, not something I created." Dante poured coffee from an antique silver service into a cup that likely cost more than my entire monthly rent. His voice was calm, almost soothing, as he added, "Though I understand your frustration. This isn't the life you planned for yourself." I accepted the delicate cup, inhaling the rich, complex aroma that hinted at rare, exotic beans and an expertly executed preparation. It was an unsettling realization, even in this gilded cage, I was being treated with a level of luxury I'd never afforded myself. "What exactly is this?" I finally asked, gesturing around the opulent room. "This arrangement? Am I a guest, a prisoner, or something else entirely?" "You're under my protection," Dante replied, his words echoing the same phrase he'd used 3 days prior. "Which means you're my responsibility until we resolve the threat against you." "I never asked for your protection." "No," he conceded, a hint of steel in his tone. "But you needed it." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and withdrew a manila envelope, sliding it across the gleaming, polished mahogany table between us. "Derek Morrison's body was found yesterday morning in the Hudson River," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. 3 bullet wounds. Signs of torture before death. Victor Klov's signature work. My hand, reaching instinctively for the envelope, froze midair. The coffee cup I held became a heavy, suspended weight. Derek was dead. Truly, irrevocably dead, not merely missing. The man who had terrorized me, who had planned to sell me like a piece of property, was now nothing more than fish food in one of New York's most polluted waterways. "How do you?" "Because I have sources throughout the city's criminal networks," Dante interrupted gently, as if reading my mind. "Derek Morrison attempted to negotiate directly with Victor Klov yesterday morning. He offered to provide information about my operations in exchange for forgiveness of his debts." I forced myself to pick up the envelope, my hand trembling almost imperceptibly. Inside were photographs, grim, vivid crime scene shots that made my stomach lurch. Derek's body, bloated and pale, had been pulled from the frigid water. There were also police reports and medical examiner findings. Victor didn't believe Derek had access to useful intelligence, Dante continued, his voice disturbingly matter-of-fact, despite the gruesome evidence laid out between us. But he was very interested to learn about the woman Derek had offered as collateral. The woman who crashed into my vehicle on the same night Derek disappeared. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. He thinks I'm working for you. He thinks you're either working for me or you possess information that could be valuable to him. Either way, he wants very much to have a conversation with you. Dante's smile held no warmth, a chilling contrast to his words. Victor Clough's conversations tend to be brief, but extremely unpleasant. I stared at the crime scene photographs, trying to reconcile the violent, lifeless corpse with the man who had once brought me flowers and tearfully promised to change his controlling behavior. Derek had been a terrible man, abusive, possessive, manipulative. Yet, seeing him reduced to a swollen, discolored cadaver in morgue photos made me feel profoundly sick. I need some air, I said, pushing back from the table abruptly. Of course, Dante replied, as if this were a perfectly normal request under the circumstances. The gardens are lovely this time of day. He gestured toward the elegant French doors that led out to a sun-drenched terrace. Marco will accompany you, naturally. Naturally? I echoed, the word dripping with sarcasm. I stood, leaving the horrific photographs scattered on the polished surface of the table, like stark evidence of everything wrong with the dangerous world I had unwittingly stumbled into. Because you're under my protection, Elena, Dante's voice stopped me at the door, soft but firm. When I turned, his expression held something I hadn't seen before, something that might have been genuine concern. I know this isn't the life you wanted, but it's the life that will keep you breathing. The gardens, viewed in the bright daylight, were even more impressive than I'd imagined, with meticulously planned landscapes that carved intimate, secluded spaces out of the vast grounds. Marco followed at a discreet distance, his presence a constant, watchful shadow, as I walked along gravel paths winding between flower beds that clearly required a dedicated, full-time staff to maintain their flawless beauty. Everything here was perfect, controlled, breathtakingly beautiful, and utterly, completely artificial. I found myself at a small, tranquil pond where ornamental fish swam in lazy, endless circles, seemingly content in their pristine, perfect environment, much like I was, trapped in mine. The bitter irony of the situation was not lost on me. Enjoying the view? Dante's voice came from behind me, closer than I'd anticipated. I turned to find him approaching alone. He had apparently dismissed Marco. He'd removed his impeccably tailored suit jacket, rolling up his shirt sleeves in a gesture that should have made him look more casual, more approachable. Instead, it only served to emphasize the raw power in his forearms and the glint of an expensive watch catching the morning sunlight. It's very controlled, I observed, my gaze sweeping across the manicured landscape. Everything in its proper place, serving its intended purpose. I turned to face him directly, the careful politeness that had defined our interactions finally wearing thin. You think that's what this is, don't you? Control for its own sake? My voice gained strength, fueled by a rising frustration. You've researched every detail of my life, dressed me like a doll, fed me like a pampered pet, and surrounded me with enough luxury to make me feel grateful for my captivity. It's all very sophisticated, Dante, but it's still just control. Something flickered in Dante's intense eyes, surprise, perhaps, or an unexpected glimmer of approval. You're not what I expected, he murmured, a faint smile playing on his lips. What did you expect? I challenged. Most people in your situation would be either terrified into compliance or attempting to seduce me for some perceived advantage. He stepped closer, his proximity allowing me to catch the subtle scent of his expensive cologne and to notice the faint, almost imperceptible scar along his jawline. You're doing neither. Maybe I'm just not most people. No, he agreed softly, his gaze unwavering. You're definitely not. The moment stretched between us, thick with an undeniable, dangerous attraction I absolutely refused to acknowledge. Dante Moretti was everything I should fear, powerful, dangerous, ruthlessly controlling. Yet, standing here in the heart of his perfectly curated garden, I couldn't ignore the disconcerting way my pulse quickened whenever he looked at me as if I were something rare, something uniquely valuable. "Tell me something," I said, my voice deliberately breaking the tension before I could do something truly stupid. "The night you found me, when I crashed into your car, you were leaving a meeting, weren't you? Something to do with Victor Clav." Dante's expression shuddered slightly, a momentary hardening around his eyes. "Yes," he confirmed. "What kind of meeting requires bulletproof vehicles and armed escorts?" "The kind where people discuss territory, business arrangements, and occasionally, who lives or dies." His brutal honesty was jarring, yet oddly refreshing after 3 days of careful euphemisms and veiled explanations. I was attempting to negotiate a peaceful resolution to Victor's expansion into my areas of influence. "And how did that go?" "Poorly." Dante turned away from me, his gaze sweeping over his meticulously controlled paradise. "Victor Clav isn't interested in peaceful resolutions. He believes that power should be taken, not negotiated for." "Is that what this is about, then? Power?" I asked, a new understanding dawning. "It's about protecting what's mine," he stated, the possessiveness in his voice making me shiver despite the warm morning air. "My family, my people, my territory. Victor Clav wants to tear down everything my father and grandfather built, and he doesn't care who gets hurt in the process." "Your father and grandfather," I repeated, absorbing the generational legacy he spoke of. "The Moretti family has controlled certain aspects of New York's economy for 3 generations, Dante said, as casually as he might discuss the day's weather. "Shipping, construction, waste management, import-export, legitimate businesses with, shall we say, unofficial aspects. And Victor wants to take that away from you?" "Victor wants me dead, and my organization absorbed into his." Dante turned back to face me, his expression now deadly serious, stripped of all pretense. "The night you crashed into my car, I was returning from our final attempt at negotiation." He'd made it clear that war was inevitable. The chilling weight of that statement settled over me like a lead blanket. I wasn't just caught between 2 dangerous men, I was caught between 2 powerful armies, poised and preparing for an imminent, brutal battle. "Where does that leave me?" I asked, the question heavy with unspoken fear. "Safer here than anywhere else in the city," Dante replied, his gaze unwavering. "Until we can eliminate the threat Victor poses." "Eliminate the threat," I repeated slowly, the words tasting cold on my tongue. "You mean kill him?" "I mean protect what matters to me." Dante's eyes met mine with an intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. "And you matter to me, Elena, more than you should, considering how we met." The raw, unexpected admission hung in the air between us, a fragile bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. Dante Moretti was offering me something profound: protection, unparalleled luxury, and possibly even genuine affection. But the implicit price was immense: my freedom, my old life, any chance of being anything other than a kept woman in a criminal's opulent paradise. "I need to think," I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. "Of course." Dante stepped back, giving me physical space but never breaking eye contact. "Take all the time you need. But remember, out there, you're Elena Harper, a physical therapy student with no protection and no resources. Here, you're under the protection of the Moretti family. And that, in this city, means everything." As he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the silently circling ornamental fish and my newly complicated thoughts, I realized he was right about one undeniable truth: I wasn't most people. Most people, faced with such a stark choice, would have unhesitatingly chosen safety over uncertainty, luxury over freedom. But I was beginning to understand that most people had never felt the dangerous, intoxicating pull of Dante Moretti's focused attention, or the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that being his might be exactly what I had been searching for my entire life, without ever realizing it. The attack came at 3:17 a.m., heralded by the shattering crash of breaking glass and the chilling, sharp crack of automatic weapons fire echoing through the mansion's vast marble corridors. I bolted upright in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs as a cold wave of adrenaline flooded my system. Outside my window, the security lights had instantly activated, bathing the sprawling grounds in a harsh, clinical white light that starkly revealed dark figures moving with unsettling military precision between the meticulously manicured hedges. This wasn't a robbery. This was war. My bedroom door burst open with a crash, before I could fully process the terror gripping me. Marco appeared in full tactical gear, his face grim and utterly focused as he swept the room with practiced, urgent efficiency. "Miss Harper, we need to move now," he commanded. "What's happening?" I gasped, my voice thin. "Clough's people found us." Marco was already at my closet, pulling out clothes and practically throwing them at me. "Get dressed. We have maybe 3 minutes before they breach the main house." I scrambled into jeans and a sweater, my fingers clumsy and shaking uncontrollably as the relentless gunfire continued to erupt from multiple directions outside. Through the windows, I could see muzzle flashes, brief, deadly bursts of light illuminating the pre-dawn darkness like a swarm of malevolent fireflies. The perfectly ordered, tranquil world of the Moretti estate had been violently transformed into a chaotic battlefield. "Where's Dante?" I demanded. "Coordinating the defense." Marco checked his weapon with the calm, efficient movements of someone who had done this countless times before. "He wanted you moved to the panic room immediately." The panic room turned out to be far more than just a room. It was a heavily reinforced bunker, cleverly hidden behind a bookshelf in Dante's opulent study. It was equipped with sophisticated communication equipment, extensive medical supplies, and enough food and water to survive a prolonged siege. Banks of monitors displayed every conceivable angle of the sprawling estate, starkly revealing the full scope of the assault. At least 20 armed figures had breached the perimeter, moving with the terrifying coordination and precision of professional soldiers. "How did they find us?" I asked, watching the screens in horrified, morbid fascination as Dante's security forces engaged the attackers in brutal, running battles across the grounds. "Someone talked," Marco replied grimly, speaking rapidly into his headset in fluent Italian before switching seamlessly to English. "Or they followed a signal. Clough has resources we gravely underestimated." On one monitor, I saw Dante himself, leading a team of his men through the chaotic gardens, moving with the fluid, deadly grace of someone born and trained for combat. He wore tactical gear as if he had been born in it, directing his forces with swift, decisive hand signals while laying down devastating covering fire with an assault rifle. Witnessing his seamless transformation from sophisticated businessman to lethal warrior was both terrifying and utterly mesmerizing. "He's good at this," I found myself whispering, an involuntary gasp escaping my lips. "Best I've ever seen," Marco agreed, his eyes glued to the multiple radio frequencies he was monitoring. Dante didn't just inherit his position. He earned it, in situations exactly like this. The lights flickered violently and then went out, plunging us into sudden, oppressive darkness, broken only by the eerie glow of the security monitors. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, restoring partial light, but the brief blackout felt like a chilling omen. "They're trying to cut power to the main systems," Marco explained, his fingers flying over the communication console with frantic speed. "If they take out the generators, we lose all surveillance and defensive coordination." On screen, I watched Dante's team fighting their way, inch by bloody inch, toward the backup power facility. But Clough's people had anticipated this move with ruthless precision. The basement corridors now swarmed with armed figures, transforming the mansion's lower levels into a deadly, claustrophobic maze of hide-and-seek. "Marco," I said quietly, unable to tear my eyes from the horrifying screens. "The night Derek died, you said Clough tortured him for information. What if Derek told him more than you realized?" Marco's expression darkened perceptibly as he considered this chilling possibility. What do you mean? Derek knew I worked at the rehabilitation center. He knew my schedule, my routines, probably even my emergency contacts. I watched Dante disappear from one monitor only to reappear on another, still fiercely fighting his way through the mansion's crumbling defenses. What if he told Claude about my work? About the techniques I know? What kind of techniques? Marco asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Physical therapy isn't just about helping people recover, I explained, pieces of a terrifying puzzle clicking together in my mind. It's about understanding how bodies work, how they break, how to manipulate pain and healing. In the wrong hands, that knowledge could be very useful for interrogation. Marco went very still, his gaze fixed on me as the terrible realization dawned on him. You think Claude wants you alive for more than just information about Dante's operations? I think Derek sold me twice, I said, a growing horror blooming in my chest. Once as collateral for his debts, and again as a potential asset when Claude captured him. The implications were staggering, cold and terrifying. Victor Claude wasn't just trying to eliminate a witness or capture a pawn in his brutal war with Dante. He wanted someone with specialized medical knowledge who could be incredibly useful for his own operations. Someone who understood human anatomy well enough to inflict precise damage, or perhaps, to extract information efficiently. A new wave of explosions rocked the mansion, closer this time, shaking the very foundations. On the monitors, I could see that several of Claude's men had already reached the main floor, moving systematically through rooms while Dante's embattled forces fell back toward more defensible positions. Miss Harper, Marco said, his voice suddenly urgent as he received rapid-fire updates through his earpiece. We may need to evacuate to the secondary facility. What about Dante? I asked, my heart seizing. He's ordered the fallback protocol. If we can't hold the main house, everyone retreats to the warehouse district, where we have better tactical advantages. I watched the monitors, sick to my stomach as the battle raged, tearing through the very mansion I'd called home for the past week. The elegant library where Dante and I had shared coffee, the tranquil gardens where we'd walked and talked, the formal dining room where he'd shown me those horrific photographs of Derek's corpse, all of it was being systematically torn apart by men wielding automatic weapons with ruthless military training. There! I cried, pointing to one monitor that showed Dante pinned down behind an overturned couch in what looked like the main foyer. He's trapped. 3 of Claude's men had him in a deadly crossfire, skillfully using the cover of the grand marble pillars to advance on his position. I could see the chilling calculation in their movements. They weren't trying to kill him quickly. They wanted to capture him alive, most likely for the same sinister reasons they wanted me. Marco, we have to help him. I pleaded, my voice urgent. Miss Harper, my orders are to keep you safe, Marco insisted, his tone resolute. Dante would rather die than have you put in danger trying to save him. But what if there's another way? I countered, my mind racing. I studied the monitors intently, my physical therapy training unexpectedly kicking in as I began to analyze the tactical situation like a complex rehabilitation case. I know this house better than Claude's people do. And I know things about combat injuries that could be useful. What are you thinking? Marco asked, suspicion warring with a flicker of hope in his eyes. The service corridors, I said, tracing intricate routes on the monitor screens with a trembling finger. The ones the staff used to move around without disturbing guests. They connect to every major room, including the foyer where Dante's pinned down. Marco shook his head, a grim line to his mouth. Too dangerous. More dangerous than letting Victor Claude capture the head of the Moretti family? I challenged, meeting his eyes directly. You said Dante earned his position. Let me earn mine. For a long, agonizing moment, Marco wrestled with conflicting loyalties, his duty to protect me at all costs versus his desperate need to save his boss. Finally, with a decisive sigh, he reached for a weapons case I hadn't noticed tucked away beneath the console. If we're doing this, he said grimly, his voice flat, you follow my lead exactly. No heroics, no improvisation. Understood, I affirmed, my own voice surprisingly steady. Understood. As Marco armed me with a compact pistol and rapidly explained the basics of point-and-shoot combat, a profound realization settled over me. I was crossing a line I could never uncross. Elena Harper, physical therapy student, would never have considered charging into a gunfight to save a man she barely knew. But that Elena Harper was rapidly disappearing, replaced by someone harder, more decisive, more willing to fight for what mattered to her. And Dante Moretti, dangerous, powerful, fiercely protective Dante, had somehow, inexplicably, become what mattered most. The service corridors were narrow and oppressively dark, lit only by emergency lighting that cast everything in an eerie, hellish red glow. Marco moved silently ahead of me with practiced stealth, communicating through precise hand signals as we navigated the intricate maze of passages that honeycombed the vast mansion. We could hear the relentless gunfire above us, muffled by thick marble and hardwood floors, but still close enough to make my pulse race with frantic speed. Twice, we had to freeze, pressing ourselves against the cold walls, as heavy footsteps passed directly overhead, Klav's men, systematically searching rooms and calling to each other in what sounded like harsh Russian. There, Marco whispered, his voice barely audible, as we reached a junction that connected directly to the main foyer. Through a grimy service grate, we could clearly see Dante's position. He was bleeding from a wound on his left arm, using his good hand to return fire with grim determination while his options rapidly dwindled. When I give the signal, Marco breathed in my ear, his voice urgent, you provide covering fire toward the pillars on the right. Don't try to hit anything. Just make noise and keep their heads down. I'll circle around and take them from behind. I nodded, gripping the compact pistol with hands that were surprisingly steadier than I'd expected. The metallic weight of the weapon felt foreign, yet oddly not uncomfortable, almost like a tool I had always been meant to hold. Now, Marco whispered, his voice a low hiss. I kicked out the service grate with a sudden, forceful movement and immediately opened fire toward the marble pillars, the pistol bucking violently in my hands as I squeezed the trigger repeatedly. The concussive sound was deafening in the enclosed space, and I could see chips of marble flying as my wild shots went wide of their targets. But it worked. Klav's men, startled and disoriented, dove for cover, their attention instantly divided between Dante's embattled position and this new, unexpected threat from an impossible angle. In that critical moment of confusion, Marco appeared behind them like a silent, deadly ghost, his weapon speaking with grim, lethal precision. When the chaotic shooting stopped, 3 bodies lay motionless on the polished marble floor. And Dante, disheveled and bleeding, was staring at me with an expression of utter amazement, and something that might have been profound pride. Elena, he said, his voice a low growl as he rose from his defensive position behind the overturned couch. What the hell are you doing here? Saving your life, I replied, surprised by how calm and steady my own voice sounded, despite the raw adrenaline coursing through every vein in my system. Dante crossed the foyer in quick, powerful strides, pulling me fiercely against his chest with his good arm while Marco efficiently secured the area around us. I could feel the frantic beat of his heart racing against mine, smell the intoxicating mix of gunpowder and his expensive cologne, feel the warmth of his breath against my hair. You could have been killed, he murmured roughly, his voice thick with emotion. So could you, I retorted, my voice softer. Elena. The way he said my name carried an unexpected weight, a promise, a claim, a deep possessiveness. When he pulled back slightly to look at me, his intense brown eyes held a burning intensity that made everything else, the fading echo of gunfire, the lingering danger, the motionless bodies on the floor, fade into irrelevant background noise. You're in danger because of me, he said softly, his thumb tracing a path along my jawline. I know this isn't going to get easier. Klav won't stop until one of us is dead. I thought about Derek's bloated corpse in the Hudson River, about the ruthless men who had just tried to capture us both, about the monumental choice I was making by standing here in Dante's arms instead of demanding to be taken somewhere safe, somewhere away from this war. Then don't leave me out of it, I said, meeting his gaze directly, my resolve hardening. If I'm going to be in danger anyway, let me be in it with you. Something profound shifted in Dante's expression, a momentous decision made in the fleeting space between one heartbeat and the next. Then his mouth was on mine, claiming me with a raw, desperate kiss that tasted of gunpowder and an unspoken future, of promises neither of us was ready to articulate aloud. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the mansion had fallen into an unsettling silence around us. The immediate battle for the Moretti estate was over, but the brutal war with Victor Clave had only just begun. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer just collateral damage in that war. I was a willing participant, armed and dangerous, and completely, irrevocably committed to the man who held me as if I was worth fighting the entire world to protect. The devastating discovery came 3 days after the attack, hidden amidst Marco's personal effects like a meticulously placed bomb, waiting to detonate what fragile remnants of my trust still existed. I had been searching for first aid supplies in his room. He had been unconscious since taking a bullet during the siege, when my fingers brushed against an encrypted phone, cleverly tucked inside a hollowed-out book on his nightstand. The messages were in Russian, but the contact name was clear enough. Because my hands began to shake uncontrollably as I scrolled through months of communications, each chilling exchange systematically selling pieces of our lives to the enemy. Meeting schedules, intricate security protocols, my own daily routines, even photographs of me walking innocently through the mansion's gardens, taken from angles that could only have been captured by someone with intimate, unrestricted access to the property. Marco. Dante's most trusted lieutenant. The man who had stood beside me during the terrifying firefight, who had trained me to use a weapon, who had risked his own life protecting what we both claimed to love. He had been betraying us, betraying Dante, from the very beginning. Elena. Dante's voice, a low rumble from the doorway, made me jump violently, nearly dropping the incriminating phone. He stood in the entrance to Marco's room, his left arm still held stiffly in a sling from the gunshot wound he'd sustained during the relentless attack. The past 3 days had visibly aged him, etching new, weary lines around his intense eyes and a formidable hardness in his jaw that hadn't been there before. "We need to talk," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tempest raging within me. Dante stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him with his good hand, his gaze fixed on me. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I held up the phone, watching his expression shift, a subtle but profound change from initial curiosity to dangerous, absolute stillness as he processed the devastating truth I was showing him. "Marco's been feeding information to Clave," I stated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. 4 months, maybe longer. Dante crossed the room in 2 swift strides, taking the encrypted phone from my hands with surgical precision. His dark eyes rapidly scanned the messages, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury as he absorbed the stark evidence of betrayal documented in black and white. "Son of a bitch," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet the words thrummed with a suppressed power, carrying the crushing weight of an impending earthquake. "There's more," I told him, dreading the next layer of truth but knowing he had to hear it all. "Dante, the night I crashed into your car, Marco knew I was going to be there." His head snapped up, a question in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" I pointed to a message thread dated a week before the accident. "Look at the timestamps." Marco told Clave about Derek's debt, about his plan to use me as collateral. But there's something else, something far more insidious. A message about tracking your return from the meeting with Clave that very night. Marco made sure you'd be on Madison Avenue at exactly the right time. Dante went completely still, the kind of absolute stillness that preceded a violent storm. "You're saying the accident wasn't random?" "I'm saying Marco orchestrated everything," I clarified, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Derek chasing me running that red light, even the exact intersection where we collided. He wanted you to find me, Dante. He wanted you to bring me here. Why would he? Dante stopped, the full, devastating implications crashing over him like a wave of ice water. Because Claude knew about your medical background, I added quietly, your knowledge of anatomy, pain management, interrogation techniques. And because he knew you'd protect me. Marco's been playing a long game, using me as bait to make you vulnerable. Dante set the phone down with careful, deliberate control. But I could see the raw, unchecked rage building in his dark eyes, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. 20 feet away, Marco lay unconscious in the mansion's pristine medical facility, hooked to machines that kept him alive, his body valiantly fighting off the infection from the gunshot wound, a wound that might have been deliberately inflicted to maintain his deep cover. How long have you known? Dante asked, his voice dangerously quiet, barely above a murmur. I found the phone an hour ago, I replied. I've been trying to work out the full extent of his treachery. I pulled out the hard copies I'd made of the most damaging messages, spreading them on the table. It goes back at least 8 months, maybe longer. He's given Claude everything, our security protocols, financial information, personnel files, even the most intimate details about your childhood, your family. Dante's jaw tightened as he scanned the evidence, his gaze lingering on the details. My parents, my sister, the anniversary of their deaths, the location where they're buried, even the specific, brutal way they were killed. I watched his hands clench into tight fists, knuckles turning white. Claude has been preparing for psychological warfare, not just physical. His eyes, dark and intense, met mine, making my pulse quicken. And you? What did Marco tell him about you? I hesitated, then handed him another stack of messages. Everything. My background, my training, my feelings for you. Dante read in silence, his expression growing darker with each revelation. Marco had meticulously catalogued every conversation, every moment of growing intimacy, every subtle sign that Elena Harper was becoming more than just a protected asset to the head of the Moretti family. He turned our relationship into intelligence, Dante said, his voice laced with disgust. Worse than that, I replied, showing him the final set of messages. Look at the dates on these last exchanges. Marco was planning to deliver me to Claude during the next arranged meeting. When? Tomorrow night. There's a warehouse in Brooklyn where you're supposed to meet with Claude's representatives to discuss territorial agreements. Marco was going to drug me and present me as a peace offering. Dante went silent for a long moment, processing betrayals that cut deeper than any bullet. His most trusted ally had systematically dismantled everything he'd built, using the woman he cared about as the ultimate weapon against him. I should have seen it, he said finally, his voice laced with self-reproach. Marco's been with me for 5 years. He saved my life twice, built half our security protocols, trained our people. That's precisely what made him so valuable to Claude, I pointed out, and so dangerously effective against us. Dante looked toward the medical facility where Marco still fought for his life, the machines beeping steadily in the distance. Part of me wants to walk in there and put a bullet in his head while he sleeps. But you won't. No, Dante agreed, his voice strained. Because I need him alive long enough to find out what other insidious traps he's planted in our organization. And because, he paused, searching for words, because you've taught me that not every problem should be solved with violence. The admission surprised us both. 3 weeks ago, Dante Moretti would have executed a traitor without a second thought. Now, he was considering alternatives, looking for solutions that didn't involve more blood on his hands. What are you thinking? I asked. I'm thinking Marco gave us an opportunity along with his betrayal. Dante's expression shifted from raw fury to cold, calculating focus. The strategic mind that had built an empire was reasserting itself. Clav expects to receive you tomorrow night. What if we give him what he wants, but not the way he expects? You want to use me as bait? I asked, a tremor in my voice. I want to use Marco's betrayal against Clav, Dante corrected, his gaze unwavering. But only if you're willing. This would be incredibly dangerous, Elena. More dangerous than anything we've done so far. I thought about the encrypted phone, about months of documented intimacies meticulously sold to our enemy, about the man unconscious in the medical facility who'd smiled at me while secretly planning my abduction. The woman who'd crashed into Dante's car 3 weeks ago would have been horrified by what I was considering. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone harder, more decisive, and absolutely furious at being betrayed by someone I'd begun to trust. What do you need me to do? Dante's smile was sharp as winter steel. Help me turn Marco's trap into Clav's funeral. As we began planning our counterattack, I realized I'd crossed another definitive line in my transformation from innocent bystander to active participant in Dante's war. Marco's betrayal hadn't just exposed our vulnerabilities, it had stripped away the last of my illusions about the life I'd chosen. I wasn't just under Dante Moretti's protection anymore. I was his partner in everything, including the uncompromising pursuit of revenge against the people who'd tried to use our growing connection as a weapon against us both. Tomorrow night, Victor Clav would learn that some traps work both ways, and that the woman he tried so hard to capture was far more dangerous than he could possibly imagine. The Brooklyn warehouse stood like a monument to forgotten industry, its broken windows reflecting the harbor lights in jagged, melancholic fragments. I sat in the passenger seat of Dante's Maserati, watching the rain streak down the windshield while my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. In 12 hours, this desolate place would host a meeting that would either end the war with Victor Clav or get us both killed. You don't have to do this, Dante said for the 5th time since we'd left the mansion. His hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, and I could see the profound conflict warring in his brown eyes. We can find another way. There is no other way, I replied, adjusting the concealed microphone taped against my collarbone. Marco's betrayal gave us one chance to turn this around. If we don't take it, Clav will keep coming until one of us is dead. Dante parked in the deep shadow of a shipping container, carefully positioned away from the security cameras that would record tomorrow's meeting. Through the rain-streaked darkness, I could discern other vehicles strategically positioned around the warehouse. Dante's men were taking their positions, preparing for what we all hoped would be Victor Clav's final, fatal mistake. The moment you signal distress, we abort, Dante said, turning to face me in the dim interior of the car. I don't care if Clav has a gun to your head or promises to end the war. You signal, and I come in shooting. And if everything goes according to plan, then tomorrow night, Victor Clav learns that the Moretti family doesn't negotiate with people who threaten what's ours. Dante's voice carried the cold certainty of someone who'd built an empire on the foundation of keeping his word. But Elena, if something goes wrong. I silenced him by pressing my lips to his, tasting rain and grim determination and the fear he was trying so hard to hide beneath his iron resolve. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, I could see my own unyielding resolve reflected in his eyes. Nothing's going wrong, I said, my voice steady. Marco gave us everything we need to know about Clav's operation, his security protocols, his personnel, even his psychological profile. We're not walking into a trap. We're building one. Dante nodded, but I could still see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed against the steering wheel in restless patterns that spoke of nervous energy barely contained. Tell me again what happens if he suspects you're working with me. He won't, I said, with more confidence than I felt. According to Marco's files, Clav expects his prisoners to show fear, defiance, or attempts at seduction. I'm going to give him something else entirely, useful information he can verify, delivered by someone too terrified to lie. I adjusted the hidden recording device one more time. Clav thinks he's getting a frightened physical therapy student who was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. By the time he realizes what I actually am, it'll be too late. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Marco's encrypted phone contained detailed intelligence about Klaus' operation, locations, personnel, financial structures, everything we needed to cripple his organization. But that intelligence was useless unless we could get close enough to verify it and identify targets for elimination. My role was to play the terrified victim while secretly documenting everything I saw and heard. The recording equipment would capture conversations, locations, and personnel details that Dante's forces could use to coordinate simultaneous strikes against Klaus' entire network. "And your brother?" Dante asked quietly. The question hit me like ice water. 3 hours ago, we'd received confirmation that James Harper, the brother I'd mourned for 5 years, was not only alive but serving as one of Klaus' most trusted lieutenants. The revelation had nearly broken something fundamental inside me, but it also provided the final, cruel piece of our plan. "James is the reason this will work," I said, though the words tasted bitter on my tongue. "Klaus will want to use our reunion as psychological leverage. He'll bring James to the meeting to demonstrate his power over me, and when you see him, I'll do what needs to be done." I met Dante's gaze directly, my own resolve burning. James made his choice when he faked his death and joined Klaus. Now I'm making mine. The truth was far more complicated than I wanted to admit. Part of me still remembered the brother who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd protected me from bullies, who'd promised to always be there when our parents died. But that James Harper had died in the car accident 5 years ago. The man working for Victor Klaus was someone else entirely. Someone who'd used my grief as cover for his new, ruthless criminal career. "I need you to promise me something," Dante said, his voice rough with emotion. "What?" "Promise me that no matter what happens tomorrow night, you'll remember that you chose this life. You chose us." His hand found mine in the darkness of the car, fingers intertwining with desperate intensity. "Because after tomorrow, there's no going back, Elena. You'll be as deep in this world as I am." I thought about the woman who'd crashed into his car 3 weeks ago, Elena Harper, physical therapy student, living paycheck to paycheck and dreaming of a quiet, normal life. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone I'd once known but could barely remember. "I'm already there," I said quietly. "The moment I chose to fight beside you instead of hiding behind you, I crossed that line. Tomorrow night isn't about becoming something new. It's about finishing what we started." Dante brought our joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to my knuckles. "What we started," he repeated, a low rumble in his chest. I like the sound of that. Even though it means I'll know all your secrets, every detail of how the Moretti family operates. Especially because of that, Dante's smile held warmth and possessiveness in equal measure. A queen needs to understand the kingdom she's going to rule. The word hung between us like both a promise and a question. Asterisk queen. Asterisk not just a protected asset or a cherished lover, but an equal partner in everything Dante had built and everything we would build together. "Is that what I am?" I asked, testing the word on my tongue. "You're queen. You're whatever you want to be," Dante replied. "But if you're asking what I want you to be," he paused, searching for words, "I want you to be the person who stands beside me when the world tries to tear us apart. I want you to be the voice that reminds me there's more to power than fear. I want you to be the reason I build something worth protecting instead of just something worth fighting for." I stared at him in the dim light, at this dangerous man who'd somehow become the undeniable center of my world. 3 weeks ago, the idea of ruling a criminal empire would have horrified me. Now, the possibility felt like destiny finally revealing itself. "Ask me again after tomorrow night," I said finally, a small smile playing on my lips. "When we've eliminated Klaus and secured our future, ask me then if I want to be your queen." Dante's laugh was soft and full of dark promise. "Oh, I will. And when I do, I already know what your answer will be." As we drove back toward the mansion through the rain-soaked streets of Brooklyn, I realized he was right. The woman who'd fled from Derek Morrison's abuse had evolved into someone who would walk willingly into Victor Klov's trap. The frightened crash victim had become a predator capable of using her own brother as bait. Tomorrow night would test everything we'd built together, our trust, our strategy, our love, and our willingness to do whatever it took to protect what mattered most. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Fear was for people who had something to lose. Elena Harper had lost everything the night she crashed into Dante Moretti's SUV. What emerged from that wreckage was someone stronger, more dangerous, and absolutely committed to building an empire worth ruling alongside the man who'd shown her what it meant to choose power over safety. Tomorrow, Victor Klov would learn the brutal difference between a victim and a queen. By the time he understood his mistake, it would be far too late to correct it. The Brooklyn warehouse felt like a cathedral of shadows when I walked through its rusted doors, my footsteps echoing faintly in the vast emptiness above. Victor Klov sat at a scarred metal table in the center of the cavernous space, flanked by 6 armed men whose faces belonged on wanted posters. Even seated, he radiated the kind of casual menace that came from decades of getting his way through violence and intimidation. But it was the man standing directly behind him that made my breath catch in my throat. James Harper looked exactly like our father. The same auburn hair, the same sharp jawline, the same piercing green eyes I saw in my own mirror each morning. 5 years had hardened him, adding lean muscle to his frame and subtle lines to his face, but he was unmistakably my brother. The brother I'd mourned, whose funeral I'd attended, whose grave I'd visited every year on the anniversary of his supposed death. "Hello, sister," James said, his voice carrying an accent I didn't recognize, Russian, maybe, or something Eastern European. "You look well, considering the circumstances." Victor Klov leaned back in his chair, studying me with pale blue eyes that missed nothing. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 45, with silver hair slicked back and hands that looked surprisingly soft until you noticed the faint scars across his knuckles. "Miss Elena Harper," he said, pronouncing each syllable with careful, almost mocking precision. "The woman who has caused me so much trouble." "I didn't cause you anything," I replied, letting a calculated measure of fear creep into my voice while the hidden recording equipment captured every word. "I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time." "Were you?" Klov gestured for me to sit in the chair across from him, positioned perfectly to catch every angle from the cameras I knew Dante had placed throughout the warehouse. "Or were you exactly where Dante Moretti wanted you to be?" I sat down carefully, letting my hands tremble slightly as I placed them on the cold metal table. "I don't know what you mean." "Your brother has told me fascinating things about your childhood, Elena, about how you always were too curious for your own good, always inserting yourself into situations that didn't concern you." Klov's smile held no warmth, only a chilling amusement. "It seems some things never change." James moved to stand beside Klov's chair, and I couldn't help but notice the expensive watch on his wrist, the impeccably tailored suit that spoke of money and influence. My dead brother had done very well for himself in the criminal underworld. "Tell me about your relationship with Dante Moretti," Klov continued conversationally. "He's protecting me," I said, which was true enough. "After Derek died, Mr. Moretti said I wasn't safe because of what I'd overheard." "And what did you overhear?" I recounted the conversation about weapons, shipments, and warehouse locations, information that Marco had confirmed was already known to Klov's organization. As I spoke, I could see one of Klov's men taking notes, probably cross-referencing my story against intelligence they'd already gathered. "Interesting," Klov said when I finished. "And during your time at the Moretti estate, what did you observe?" This was the crucial moment. I began describing the mansion's layout, its security protocols, and specific personnel details. All of it was carefully selected information that would appear valuable while actually being entirely useless. The real security measures were vastly different from what I described. The personnel assignments had been changed, and the defensive positions I detailed were decoys Dante had established specifically for this meeting. You paid very close attention to details, James observed, his voice still unfamiliar. Almost like you were trained to gather intelligence. I was trained as a physical therapist, I shot back, letting irritation override fear for a moment. We're taught to observe and document everything. It's part of the job. Yes, Clough said thoughtfully, his pale eyes glinting. Your medical training. That's actually why you're here, Elena. He stood up, walking around the table with predatory grace. You see, I've been looking for someone with your specific skills. Someone who understands human anatomy, pain management, recovery techniques. Someone who could be very useful in my operations. I help people heal, I said, genuine revulsion creeping into my voice. I don't hurt them. Oh, but healing and hurting are just different applications of the same knowledge, Clough replied, his hand coming to rest on my shoulder with deceptive gentleness. And I think you'd be surprised what you're capable of when properly motivated. That's when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting everything in hellish red shadows. But by then, Dante's assault team was already moving. I dove under the metal table as gunfire erupted from multiple directions, the vast warehouse becoming an echoing chamber of violence and shouting. Clough's men were professionals, but they'd been expecting a negotiation, not a coordinated military strike. Dante's forces moved with surgical precision, each team hitting predetermined targets, while communications equipment jammed Clough's ability to call for reinforcements. Through the chaos, I saw James diving for cover behind a shipping container, his hand reaching for a weapon that had been hidden beneath his jacket. The brother I'd mourned was reaching for a gun, preparing to kill the people trying to save me. Elena, move. Dante's voice cut through the gunfire as he appeared at the warehouse entrance, leading his second wave of attackers. I scrambled from under the table, staying low as bullets whizzed overhead. James had found his weapon and was returning fire, his aim disturbingly accurate as he forced Dante's men to take cover. Behind you! I screamed as one of Clough's men flanked Dante's position. Dante spun and fired in the same motion, dropping the attacker before turning his attention back to the main battle. But Clough himself had disappeared in the confusion, using the furious firefight as cover to slip away toward the warehouse's rear exit. I couldn't let him escape. Too much depended on ending this tonight. Without conscious thought, I ran toward the back of the warehouse, ducking between shipping containers and following the faint sound of Clough's retreating footsteps. The man who'd planned to torture information out of me, who'd killed Derek, and God knew how many others, was only 20 feet away from freedom. Victor! I called out, letting a desperate tremor color my voice. Don't leave me here. He turned, his pale eyes reflecting the emergency lighting like a predator caught in headlights. Elena, what are you doing? They'll kill me if they find me here. I said, walking closer with trembling, feigned steps. Please, I can be useful to you. I can tell you things about Moretti's organization that your other sources don't know. Clough hesitated, greed warring with suspicion in his cunning expression. That moment of indecision cost him everything. The knife I'd taken from James's jacket, lifted during our brief reunion embrace, slid between his ribs with the clinical precision my medical training had taught me. I found the gap between the third and fourth ribs, angled upward toward his heart, and pushed until the blade found vital organs. This is for Derek, I whispered as Clough's eyes widened with shock and sudden, terrible understanding. And for trying to use me as your personal torture expert. Viktor Clough, head of the Russian organization that had terrorized half the East Coast, died with my name on his lips and profound surprise in his eyes. The man who'd built an empire on fear and violence was killed by a 23-year-old physical therapy student who'd learned anatomy to heal people. The irony would have been a bitter laugh, had there been a moment to truly savor it. Elena. James' voice, thick with disbelief, reached me from behind. What have you done? I turned slowly to face my brother, the knife still clutched in my hand, Victor Klaus's blood a crimson stain against my clothes. I chose a side, I stated simply, my voice unwavering. He was going to make us both rich, James argued, his hands trembling as he raised his weapon. We could have ruled this city together. No, I replied, stepping deliberately over Klaus's lifeless form. You chose to rule through fear and violence. I chose to build something worth protecting. The gunshot ripped through the warehouse, a deafening echo in the sudden silence. But the shot hadn't come from James. Dante emerged from behind a shipping container, his weapon still smoking, as my brother crumpled to the ground, a single bullet through his heart. He was going to kill you, Dante said plainly, holstering his gun before crossing to where I stood over James's corpse. I looked down at my brother's still body, feeling nothing but a strange, unsettling sense of relief. The James Harper who had taught me to ride a bike had died 5 years ago in that car accident. The man now lying on the warehouse floor was merely a stranger wearing his face. It's over, I murmured, letting the blood-stained knife fall from my grasp and walking into Dante's outstretched arms. Yes, he agreed, holding me close against his chest as distant sirens began to wail. It's over. Around us, the vast space of the warehouse had fallen eerily silent, broken only by the crackling of flames where a stray bullet had ignited some forgotten paperwork. Klaus's vast organization, once so terrifying, would now undoubtedly crumble without its leader, his lieutenants turning on each other in the power vacuum his death had created. The war was decisively over, and Elena Harper, the woman who had accidentally crashed into Dante Moretti's car and unwittingly set this entire chain of events in motion, had brought it to an end with a precisely placed blade between the ribs of New York's most dangerous criminal. I was no longer the same frightened woman who had fled from Derek Morrison's abuse. I was someone harder, more decisive, and capable of killing when necessary to protect what mattered most. I was precisely who I needed to be to stand beside Dante Moretti, an equal partner in everything that lay ahead. 8 months after Victor Klaus's death, I stood on the balcony of our penthouse, a sweeping vista of Central Park unfurling before me. The morning sun painted the Manhattan skyline in glorious shades of gold and amber. My hand rested protectively over the gentle curve of my belly, where our twins were growing strong and healthy, due to arrive in the spring. Elena Moretti. The name still felt new on my tongue, like an exquisite wine that takes time to fully appreciate. But then, everything about my life felt new now, the confident way I moved through the world, the respect in people's eyes when they recognized me, and the absolute certainty that I belonged exactly where I was. The board meeting is in an hour, Dante announced from the doorway, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee and wearing the kind of smile that still made my pulse quicken. Even in his perfectly tailored business suit, preparing for a day of managing legitimate enterprises, he radiated the same dangerous magnetism that had first captured my attention in that rain-soaked intersection so long ago. Which board? I asked, accepting the cup he offered. We have so many now. The medical foundation I established using Klaus's seized assets. The construction company that provides jobs for former soldiers transitioning to civilian life. The import-export business that became surprisingly profitable once we eliminated its criminal components. The hospital expansion project. Your project. Dante settled beside me at the railing, his free hand coming to rest gently over mine on my stomach. Dr. Elena Moretti, founding director of the Moretti Medical Center. It has a nice ring to it. The medical center had been entirely my idea, born from the profound realization that my skills could heal far more than just gunshot wounds and broken bones. We were building a state-of-the-art facility in Queens, specifically designed to serve the communities that traditional healthcare systems often overlooked. It would be staffed by medical professionals who understood discretion, funded by the profits from our legitimate businesses, and managed by someone who had learned that sometimes, true healing required more than just clinical expertise. Any word from the federal task force? I asked, though I already knew the answer from the contentment evident in Dante's expression. Agent Morrison signed off on the final reports yesterday. The FBI is officially satisfied that the CLOV organization has been completely dismantled, with no remaining threats to public safety. Dante's smile held a deep satisfaction, and something that might have been profound pride. They're particularly impressed with the intelligence you provided about the medical supply theft rings. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very federal agents who had spent years trying to infiltrate Dante's organization had ultimately ended up working with us to eliminate a genuine threat to public safety. My detailed knowledge of CLOV's operations, combined with Dante's strategic expertise, had led to the arrest of over 40 criminals involved in everything from human trafficking to pharmaceutical theft. And the construction permits for the Brooklyn project, approved yesterday, will break ground next month on the first of 12 affordable housing complexes. Dante's thumb traced gentle circles on my hand. By the time our children are old enough to understand, the Moretti name will be associated with hospitals, schools, and homes. Not just the old business. We still called it that. Though most of the Moretti family's traditional activities had been either legitimized or eliminated over the past 8 months, the protection services had become a licensed security company, and the import operations had gone completely legal. Even the loan services now operated under stringent federal banking regulations. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, a question that had become a ritual between us. "You're giving up an empire your grandfather built." "I'm transforming it into something better," Dante corrected, giving the same answer he had every time. "Something our children can be proud to inherit." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse, I could see the remnants of our old world scattered across the city. The warehouse in Brooklyn, where CLOV had died, was now a vibrant community center. The sprawling mansion in Long Island had been sold to a tech entrepreneur who had transformed it into a bustling conference center. Even the Riverside Rehabilitation Center, where I had once worked part-time, was now under the Moretti medical umbrella, its services expanded and its mission elevated. "Mrs. Moretti." The voice belonged to Sarah, our housekeeper and a former member of Dante's security team. Her transition from bodyguard to domestic staff had been smoother than anyone expected, though I strongly suspected she still carried at least 2 weapons under her perfectly pressed uniform. "Yes, the car is ready for your appointment with Dr. Chen. And Mr. Ritchie has arrived for his meeting with Mr. Moretti." Dr. Chen was my obstetrician, a brilliant woman who had been treating high-risk pregnancies for 20 years and understood the unique challenges of expecting twins. Mr. Ritchie was the former head of CLOV's financial operations, who had wisely decided that cooperating with federal authorities was preferable to spending the rest of his life in prison. "I should go," I said, finishing my coffee. "The twins have been active all morning, and Dr. Chen wants to monitor their positioning." Dante walked me to the elevator, his hand never leaving the small of my back. Even now, 8 months after the last shots were fired, he remained protective in ways that should have felt suffocating, but instead felt like love made manifest. "Elena," he said as the elevator doors began to close. "Tonight, after all the meetings and appointments, I want to show you something." "What kind of something?" I teased. "The kind that requires champagne and candlelight, and a question I should have asked months ago." The elevator doors closed on his enigmatic smile, leaving me with butterflies in my stomach that had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones and everything to do with the thrilling possibility that Dante Moretti still had surprises up his expertly tailored sleeves. Dr. Chen's appointment confirmed what we had suspected. The twins were healthy, growing perfectly, and positioned for a relatively uncomplicated delivery in 12 weeks. Baby A was slightly larger. "Probably going to be our little overachiever," I murmured, studying the ultrasound images that showed 2 perfect profiles in black and white. Baby B was perfectly positioned, but seemed content to let their sibling take the lead, just like their parents. By the time I returned to the penthouse, Manhattan was transitioning from afternoon to evening, the sky painted in breathtaking shades of orange and pink that made our windows look like stained glass. Dante was waiting in our living room, but he had changed from his business suit into dark slacks and a white shirt that made his brown eyes look almost black. "Close your eyes," he said, taking my hands with the same gentle reverence he had shown from our very first day together. "Dante, trust me." I closed my eyes, letting him guide me through our home toward what I assumed was the balcony. But instead of the cool outside air, I felt the warmth of candles and smelled roses, dozens of them, if the intoxicating fragrance was any indication. "Open," Dante said softly. Our dining room had been transformed into something straight out of a fairy tale. Hundreds of white candles cast dancing shadows on the walls, while cascades of vibrant red roses covered every surface in a luxurious display of silk and velvet. A small table was set for two in the center of it all, with champagne chilling beside sparkling cider for the pregnant woman who couldn't drink alcohol but still deserved a magnificent celebration. 8 months ago, you crashed into my life and changed everything," he began, pulling out my chair with old-world gallantry. "You took a spoiled crime prince and turned him into a man worthy of building something beautiful." I sat down, overwhelmed by the sheer romance of the gesture and the profound love shining in his eyes. "You did that yourself. I just gave you a reason." "No," Dante said, moving to stand beside my chair. "You gave me everything." That's when he dropped to one knee, producing a ring box from his pocket with the flourish of a magician performing his greatest trick. The magnificent diamond inside caught the candlelight and refracted it back in 1,000 rainbow fragments. But it was the raw emotion on Dante's face that truly took my breath away. "Elena Harper Moretti, mother of my children, partner in all things, queen of everything we've built together," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Will you marry me?" I stared at him through tears of joy and love and an overwhelming gratitude for this strange, circuitous chain of events that had brought us to this perfect moment. "We're already married," I pointed out, laughing through my tears. "We had the ceremony 6 months ago." "We had a business arrangement," Dante corrected gently, sliding the ring onto my finger, just above my wedding band. "Two people making strategic decisions about their future. This time, I'm asking Elena Moretti. The woman who chose to stay, who chose to fight, who chose to build something beautiful from the wreckage of everything we used to be." "Yes," I said, pulling him up for a kiss that tasted like champagne and promises and the absolute certainty that we had built something worth protecting. "Yes to all of it." As Dante spun me around our candlelit dining room, I caught my reflection in the windows that overlooked our gleaming city. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the frightened physical therapy student who had crashed her Honda Civic into a stranger's SUV on a rainy night in Manhattan. Elena Moretti was someone stronger, more dangerous, and absolutely committed to the empire she had helped transform from a criminal enterprise into a legitimate dynasty. She was someone who could kill when necessary to protect her family, who could heal when mercy was the better choice, and who ruled beside Dante Moretti as his equal in every way that mattered. Our children would inherit hospitals and schools instead of territories and tribute. They would grow up knowing that their parents had chosen love over fear, construction over destruction, and each other over everything else the world had offered. The transformation was complete, irreversible, and absolutely perfect. And it had all started with a car accident on a rainy night when a woman fleeing her past collided with the man who would become her future. It was a deliberate choice for construction over destruction, a profound commitment to each other that superseded everything else the world had ever offered or tempted them with. This transformation they had undergone was not just complete, but utterly irreversible, culminating in a state that felt absolutely perfect. And yet, the very genesis of this extraordinary journey, this destined connection, lay in a seemingly random car accident on a tempestuous, rainy night, a moment when a woman desperately fleeing the burdens of her past quite literally collided with the man who was undeniably her future.